Welcome, everyone. My name is Brandy. I'm with Violence Free Colorado. Welcome to our Facts and Snacks. This is our part 2 of our harm reduction webinar series. We are going to go ahead and explain our language access to you all and some tech pieces, and then we will get started. So you can all see that in the upper left-hand corner, not only are we recording, but it says live and Zoom with Rev.com. Rev.com supports our captioning. So that's something just to be aware of. We're not actually live streaming anywhere. ASL interpretation is available and the Spanish interpretation will begin shortly. So in order to access the Spanish interpretation, you will click on, once it's activated, I'll let you know, and you will click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and then choose Spanish if that's what you would like to choose. And we will go ahead and test that out. Lucia, would you mind explaining that? Thank you.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos, gracias por estar con nosotros hoy. Le quería decir que si necesita acceder a la interpretación en vivo en español, puedes deslizar el icono del globo que está abajo de la pantalla y ahí le da la opción para escuchar todo eso en vivo en español, si lo quiere.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start interpretation, and I will go ahead and test that out. Lucia and Elijah, and oh, not Elijah, Lucia, Samuel, apologies. Can you let me know if you can hear me? Great, and I can't hear you, so that means it's working. Lindsay, can you also give me a thumbs up if things are working on your end as well? Thank you. Wait, I'm seeing, okay, Samuel. Let's see, I just want to make sure. Lindsay, are you comfortable with the recording? And I apologize, I can't actually see that. Let us know if there's any problems with that. Okay, now I see you, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn our slides on. All right, can someone tell me if that is the correct view? Wonderful. Okay, again, one of the things that we want to let you all know is that in terms of, oh, actually, Amanda, are you frozen? I'm not sure. Oh, no, I see you now. Apologies. Sorry, I didn't know if that was my internet connection. Apologies.
No, can you see me okay? Before we begin, I can log off and log back in if that's better.
It is fine for me. Can someone else verify that?
This is Miranda. I can see you okay. It seems to be on a little bit of a lag, but not too bad. We'll keep a note on it, and if it begins to lag too much, I'll let you know.
Thank you. And then I'll just log out and log back in and let the other interpreter. Thank you.
Wonderful. And so if anybody would like to access ASL interpretation, you can go ahead and right click on the ASL interpreter images in the box. You click on the 3 dots in the upper right hand corner of their image and you can select pin so that you can pin them. If that doesn't work, please message us in the chat, either myself, Brandy, or Miranda. Please let us know and we'll make sure that you have the ability to pin. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our interpreters for being here. When we are speaking, because you all are able to come off mute and ask questions as well as type in the chat box, please say your name so that helps the interpreters and for all of us to track who is speaking. And in the chat, if you would all like to go ahead and introduce yourselves with your names, your pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing, as well as your organization. We would love to see who's here The other thing we'll ask, one more thing, is that if you're watching, if you're attending the webinar today with someone else's login, or you're watching with multiple people sharing a screen, if you could let us know that in the chat, that's really helpful for us so we can track attendance more accurately. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jami. Thank you, Jami.
Thank you, Brandy. All right. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I am on the East Coast, so it's the afternoon for me. My name is Jami Wilson. I am a training and technical assistance specialist with the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. My focus at the center is on the intersection between substance use, domestic violence, substance use coercion, as well as human trafficking. I have worked with many different populations over the years, foster care youth, adults with opioid use disorder, low-income families, as well as survivors of human trafficking. So if you have any questions or needs around those areas, feel free to reach out. Next, please. And I think it's just my picture and my contact information on the next slide. So that's my direct email. Next. This slide is just a little bit of information, a little bit more information about the National Center, what our focus areas of focus are, and some of the work that we do. Next, please. And this is just outlining our goals or focus for this particular training. Today, we're going to define overdose versus intoxication. Explore what a potential overdose looks like and how to respond to an overdose, and also discuss overdose prevention strategies. Okay, next. All right, so let's jump right in and talk about what an overdose actually is. So an overdose occurs when a relatively large dose overwhelms a person's body, resulting in severe health consequences, including death if left untreated. In the case of opioids, an overdose causes people to stop breathing. Without help, people will die from oxygen. So opioids are respiratory depressants, as mentioned here. And so what essentially can happen is that person's breathing will become so slow or stop altogether, which could ultimately lead to cardiac arrest, which could lead to death. Here it also talks about a relatively, you'll see that the word relatively is highlighted because it really depends on the person. So say, for instance, someone has been using heroin and they've been using it for the last year. They go into an inpatient treatment program for 30 days and they come out and they relapse and they try to use that same dose that they were using, excuse me, before they enter treatment. They can overdose that first time using again because their body is no longer used to consuming that much heroin. So today we're going to be focusing a lot on opioids and stimulants, as that seems to be the largest concern amongst advocates at this time. So when speaking about opioids, we cannot leave out fentanyl. So, as I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, are aware, fentanyl has increasingly been found in street-based opiates, street-based drugs in general, especially over the last few years. Pharmaceutical fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, which means it's man-made, not naturally derived like heroin. And it's approved for treating severe pain, typically for people with like cancer. It is 50 to 100 times more potent than other opiates, like morphine. It can be prescribed in the transdermal patch form or lozenge form. And it can also, it's very easy to misuse this substance. You know, before the pandemic, we were already seeing an increase in opioid overdose deaths, opioid-related overdose deaths. However, during the pandemic, those overdose deaths increased exponentially. And fentanyl was usually part of that equation, part of those overdose deaths. Fentanyl has also been found in some street-based stimulants, including cocaine and methamphetamine, which contributes to overdose fatalities related to those substances as well. The fentanyl found in these street-based substances are more often than not illegally made or manufactured and mixed with the other substances like the heroin or stimulants. And often this is unknowingly done as far as the user is concerned. So they may or may not be aware that fentanyl is present in the substance that they're using. More often than not, they are not aware. And because fentanyl is similar to heroin in how it affects the body and heightens the euphoric effect experienced by the user, it can make these substances even more potent. Okay, and so we need to keep in mind that overdoses and overdose deaths are completely preventable, and with the right support and access to services and harm reduction aids like Naloxone or Narcan, we can reduce the number of overdose deaths related to opioids. Next, please. Okay, and so this is just a graph to demonstrate that rise in overdose deaths. So you'll see the synthetic opioids in the darker color, and then all other drugs in the orange color. But you can just see how that steady rise, how there's been a steady rise of overdose related deaths. So this graph specifically, they estimated a 33% increase in overdose deaths from 2019 to 2020. And that was the largest single year jump in overdose deaths. According to the CDC, more than 50,000 people died from synthetic opioid related overdose in 2020 alone. That was 18 times the number of people that died from opioid related deaths in 2013. So 18 fold or 18-time increase in deaths just in a 7-year span. The highest increase in mortality from opioids, including fentanyl, is among Black Americans, according to the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And when you look at the mortality for methamphetamine, when talking about stimulants, most of the people that are dying from methamphetamine overdose are among Native Americans and Alaska Natives. They are at a 12 times higher, they're overdosing at 12 times higher rate. Next, please. Excuse me. And so here we see some more statistics just to give you a better idea of how overdose is affecting our country. So more than 80% of drug overdose deaths involved opioids. So that's both synthetic and naturally derived opiates. 85%, nearly 85% of overdose deaths involved fentanyl, fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, or methamphetamine in some combination. So nearly the great majority of these overdose deaths have those substances in common. 3 in 5 people who have died from overdose related deaths could have, there was the potential to link them to care or resources that could potentially be life-saving for them. 3 out of 5 had those opportunities for intervention. Okay. Next slide, please. So what can we do? You know, this can all seem very overwhelming, daunting, but what can we do as advocates and practitioners? So we can help by building those trustworthy connections, that rapport, those real relationships with people who are using substances, and have those open person-centered conversations with them about alcohol and substance use. We can also continue to educate ourselves not only about the risk factors for overdose, but overdose prevention and resources in our community for referring people that we are working with who are currently using, or even incorporating or collaborating with harm reduction programs. Just to further reduce that risk of overdose. Okay. So now we're going to talk about some of those overdose risk factors. And you can go to the next slide, actually. Thank you. So when we talk about overdose risk factors, there's a lot of pieces that can affect or increase or decrease someone's risk of overdose. So a common misconception is that people become homeless due to their drug use. So we'll see that people experiencing housing instability, overdose is found to be the leading cause of death among these people. The fact is that homelessness itself can lead to substance use. So people experiencing homelessness may begin using drugs to adapt. So they might need drugs to stay awake. They might need drugs to sleep. They might need drugs to adjust to the trauma of just being homeless or experiencing homelessness. The criminalization of both homelessness and drug use can actually potentially lead to more dangerous or risky drug use behaviors, such as using drugs and not testing them beforehand for fentanyl, using them quickly in public locations and therefore potentially leaving behind paraphernalia in public places, or using alone in hidden areas, putting themselves at risk of overdose death because no one knows where they're using or that they're even using at all. People experiencing incarceration experience higher rates of overdose. So people who are leaving a setting where they are not typically able to access opioids or substances in general, it means that their tolerance has been decreased. So much like that person that went in the example that I gave earlier, that went to inpatient treatment for 30 days and then a month later comes out and relapses and tries to use that same amount that they were using going in. That decrease in tolerance occurs when someone is incarcerated and no longer has access or the same level of access, and therefore the same frequency of use that they would have outside. So with their tolerance being lowered, they're at increased risk of overdose when and if they start using again. Also, we have to keep in mind that just because someone is incarcerated doesn't mean that they're necessarily getting what they need to be successful in recovery, or if they even want to are interested in sobriety or no longer using substances. It's more likely that they didn't have access to resources while they were incarcerated that would address their cravings and their recovery needs, which also increases their risk of relapse and overdose once they leave, once they're no longer incarcerated. People in treatment for opioid use disorder, what we have traditionally or historically called detox is now being referred to as medical withdrawal. So someone experiencing medical withdrawal or that does not, they do not transition into onto an opioid maintenance medication or into a medication assisted treatment program. they are, they too have decreased tolerance and increased risk of overdose. Okay, and then people living with HIV and AIDS are found to have a 74% higher incidence of overdose. So this could be for a few different reasons. One might be related to overall health and their ability to process substances that could be compromised. Another reason may be due to medications that they're prescribed for HIV or AIDS. And this can actually boost or increase those effects on the body. So the respiratory depression and the lethargy, as well as the the way that the body eliminates or processes the substance. Okay. And so we can go on to the next slide. Right, so continuing to talk about risk factors, but thinking about domestic and sexual violence in particular, studies have shown that people experiencing domestic and sexual violence are at an increased risk of overdose as well. So you'll see here that people who identify as female are more, 61% of the women surveyed were more likely to have experienced an overdose. 94% of women who use drugs and identify needing domestic violence services have found that those services, those domestic violence services, were inaccessible related to their substance use. And so this kind of goes back to what we talked about last week when making sure that we're not denying people services or exiting them from programming just because they have a history of substance use or are still using substances. So when speaking of dynamics of use and individual risk factors, we'll just go through this list quickly, just so we are aware of some of the things to look for as we work with those using substances. And this can, being able to identify these risk factors can actually help decrease the risk of a fatal overdose. So when we talk about using alone, well, if someone uses alone, there's no one there to notice that someone's overdosing. And so there's no one there to administer aid or call 911. Prior overdoses or history of overdose makes someone susceptible to overdosing again. And not only that, it makes them more susceptible to having a fatal overdose. Erratic pattern of use. So going back to, what I mentioned a couple of times already, having that interruption in frequency of use, can, or using different kinds of substances, or using different times of day or different amounts, or with different people. Any of those changes in any of those factors or areas can increase risk of overdose. Mixing substances can increase not only the risk of overdose, but the potency of, especially when you're talking about opioids, it can increase the potency of that opioid, especially when used with other nervous system depressants like alcohol, benzodiazepines, like anti-anxiety medications, or some sleeping medications. It's also what we see with the fentanyl, that mixing of substance, the fentanyl with the opioids or the stimulants is creating that boost or increased euphoria, as well as the respiratory depression. Physical health, any illness or chronic medical condition can increase the risk of overdose. And it just depends on how the body processes certain substances, like the liver, the kidney, or even the body's own immune system, how the body's natural defense works. Not testing the dose. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, but there are ways for people to test substances now, to make sure that they haven't mixed anything like fentanyl into heroin or stimulants, and this can decrease that overdose risk. So without testing, the person's essentially playing Russian roulette, because they don't know how, if fentanyl or some other dangerous substance has been added and can ultimately lead to overdose. Pattern of impulsivity. Is there, if someone's using impulsively, not using, that they might not be as safe when they're using. They might not, as far as how they administer the substance, they also might use more or a different substance than they're even used to. That can increase their risk of overdose. A history of suicidality, self-injury, depression or depressed mood. All of these can increase the risk. Okay. And then the other piece that I'd like to highlight is when someone's seeking profound intoxication. So you may have heard about people chasing the high. So there might be someone who's using just to not get sick, just to prevent those withdrawal symptoms. But you might have someone else who is actively seeking to be as intoxicated as they possibly can get without overdosing. And so that can also lead, or obviously significantly increases the risk of overdose. So before I keep going, I've shared a lot of information so far. Just want to check in and see if anybody has any questions or comments about anything. You can use the chat box if you don't feel comfortable taking yourself off mute. Or I'll remind you, you can ask your question directly to Brandy and Miranda, and they can ask for you. Okay. All right. Well, I will keep going, and we can go to the next page, please. All right. So here we're going to actually look at an example, a scenario. And so here we have Kelly. Kelly recently called seeking resources after experiencing physical violence from her current partner. Kelly shares that she uses opioid pills and alcohol daily. She's prescribed benzodiazepines for anxiety that she usually takes 1 to 2 times a week. But she finds she's taken them daily recently because of heightened anxiety. She also has a history of suicide attempts and depression. So one of the first questions I want to ask, thinking about overdose risk, what is one risk that you all identify from this particular scenario? Let's start there. What is something that Kelly's experiencing or doing that can lead to potential overdose?
This is Miranda. So Jamie, we have mixing substances in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or using more often.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And not only are they using more often, they're using benzodiazepines more often, which is a respiratory depressant by itself. Then you're adding the opioids, which is a respiratory depressant, and the alcohol, which is another respiratory depressant. So that is extremely risky.
Miranda, in the chat, you also have pills and alcohol daily and suicidal attempts, as well as not following prescription protocol, mixing substances, and the anxiety caused by past and abusive relationships.
Very good. Yes. Some other things that we might want to consider when working with Kelly are, what's her housing situation? Is her housing safe and stable? Is she living with her current partner that who's exhibiting this abusive, violent behavior? What are some of the other things that we might want to ask Kelly to help identify other overdose risk and help her while safety planning? So we know that she has, she's taking medication for depression and anxiety. What about other health conditions? We could ask her about that to see if there are any other risk factors related to physical health conditions, right? What about socially? Are there any areas we could explore with Kelly socially to see if there are any risk factors? Yes, Carmen, excellent. Excellent. Asking who or where she finds support. That is a very good question. Knowing what her emotional support looks like can be extremely helpful. That way you can open up conversation around whether or not Kelly would like supportive counseling, whether it's around trauma she's experienced or substance use counseling or both. Very good. Thank you, Carmen. We can also ask Kelly what she's already doing to stay as safe as possible. What does she currently do to prevent overdose? Does she already have an overdose prevention plan or access to Naloxone or Narcan? I will be referring to Narcan as Naloxone throughout the training, but I am talking about the same medication for those, just so you all know. Okay. All right.
Jamie, one thing I always thought really hard, and I don't know how to overcome is, they always talked about, I remember going to a drug training one time where there's the users versus the non-users, right? And the distrust between the two groups. And so users don't feel like they can go to non-users in court, and the non-users don't trust the users to not fall off the wagon, and I feel like really overcoming that is really, really difficult in, for the non-users. So when I was talking about asking where they find support, unfortunately, a lot of times their support are their drug using friends and partners and, whoever else. And so really how to find them. And so when I'm thinking about, they can go to treatment and stuff like that, but, who's really supporting them beyond that hour a week or whatever that is. And I think that's really hard to find, especially I live in a really rural area, trying to overcome that barrier. I didn't know if you had any ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that up first and foremost. So just thinking about my time as a substance use counselor, that was definitely a concern for a lot of patients, and something that I would make sure to work into our sessions together and follow up on over the months. And that comes from building that rapport with the person you're working with, having those conversations, candid conversations about who they can trust and who they feel safe around, identifying opportunities in the community where they can be around people at the same or similar point in recovery is also very helpful. So I live in Louisville, Kentucky. And so recently they've just implemented mutual aid groups like NA or AA, but they're specifically for people experiencing opioid use or involved in opioid use and medication assisted treatment. So finding groups like that and opportunities like that for clients where they can feel safe with people that have similar experiences is a good way to kind of address that disconnect, but also educating. I think it's important to educate everyone, especially the non-users, on the importance of, well, let me step back. I think it's well, I'll leave it there. My recommendation is just to sit down with the person, find out what their needs are, what their support system does look like, and if there are groups or programs in your area for people with similar substance use histories and at similar points in recovery where they can go and feel supported and understood and safe. I hope that answers your question. Okay, and I saw that someone else, Jane, asked, does she have friends creating an unhealthy bond with her? Very good question, and goes along with that. Finding out who their support system is. Trauma bonding. Yes, trauma bonding in a shelter setting can make clients susceptible to reusing when a client brings in substances. Yes. And we talked a little bit about this last week, how you can reduce the risk of that happening as far as someone bringing in substances into the shelter or using while in shelter. But yes, that is a very real situation that you may experience in a shelter setting. And so having those places designated for safe use, if not on campus or in or around the shelter, then in the community where people can go and safely use substances, but also safely discard any accessories that they may have as far as administering those substances. That's where that becomes very important. And it's also important to make sure that we're checking in with those who are not using, who are in recovery, and maybe even have an on-site like informal support group for those people who are struggling with living with others who are still actively using. So that's another option as well. If you don't have that safe space in your community, maybe creating a safe space through your program. Okay, and we can go to, oh, awesome, Jane, thanks. Okay, so we're going to talk more about recognizing and responding to a potential overdose. And we can go to the next slide, thank you. So one of the first pieces of identifying a potential overdose is knowing the difference between intoxication versus overdose. So when you're thinking about someone who's profoundly intoxicated, this is someone who may be very lethargic, their speech might be slurred, and their breathing may slow down, but it's still not in a danger zone, so to speak. It's still not as slow as that 8 times or less per minute. They can be aroused by just, hey, are you okay? Or, shaking them on the shoulder or doing the sternum rub. With an overdose, it is much more difficult, if not impossible, to rouse someone who is actively overdosing or who has overdosed. So they're going to be unresponsive to that stimuli, that sternal rub. That sternal rub is actually, if you do it right, it's supposed to be painful. And that's why it, wakes the person up. But if they are actively overdosing, they will either have little or no response to stimuli like that. They might find it difficult or impossible to open their eyes, or they can open their eyes, but they can't speak. You'll notice that they might have shallow breathing, very slow, shallow breathing, or even ragged breaths, where it sounds like they're almost snoring. Or it could be a choking or gurgling sound. They'll have changes in or discoloration in their extremities. So I'll give you an example of something that happened to me. I worked at when I was working at a human trafficking, anti-trafficking program. We had just been trained on how to administer Narcan, and we were carrying it because we had, several clients that we were working with who had a history of substance use. And for our protection, as well as theirs, we were carrying Narcan. And this was before the pandemic. This is probably 2018. I walked out of my office and there was a bus stop right at the office. And so in Louisville, a lot of the times what we'd see would be people in the shelters, the little bus shelters at the bus stop. They will be passed out, or obviously under the influence of a substance, or they may be in the doorway of an abandoned building or business, very public places. And the reason why that they would use here is because if they didn't have, especially if they didn't have access to Narcan, someone was more likely to see them and call for emergency services. So I walked out one day from my office and I see two men in there. One slumped forward and one is slumped to the side. And I approached them and I did the, hey, are you okay? But what I noticed, one responded immediately. He opened his eyes very slowly, couldn't say too much to me, but he could answer a few questions. And he began to, try to stand up, and he had normal coloring. But his friend, who was leaned over to the side, his legs were like around his ankles were starting to turn like a purplish blue. His fingers were turning colors. He was not responsive to me. He did not open his eyes when I yelled at him or tried to shake his shoulder. And I did have to call emergency services for him, and they ended up administering the Narcan, but he was actively overdosing. So that's just an example of profound intoxication versus overdose. Okay, and this next slide, it's similar to the last one, just going over 6 signs of an opioid overdose: trouble walking or talking, won't wake up, difficulty breathing with or without the gurgling, choking, or snoring sounds, cold, clammy skin, changes in color, usually gray, purple, or blue, fingertips, fingers, toes, feet is usually where you'll see it first, and tiny pinpoint pupils. Opioids, unlike other substances that dilate pupils, opioids constrict. And so that's another sign, a potential sign of overdose. Keep in mind that that gurgling or snoring sound is an indication of respiratory depression and potentially respiratory failure. So you don't want to let that person sleep it off. If you hear that, it's important to try to rouse that person and get them help. Also keep in mind that aspiration is a real concern for people that are both profoundly intoxicated and experiencing overdose. So if you can, roll them over to the side. That way, if they vomit, it will, the force of gravity will make it come out of their mouth, as opposed to them aspirating it, breathing it into their lungs, and potentially dying from that. Signs, oh, sorry, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. These are signs of a stimulant overdose. Looks quite different from an opioid overdose. This is actually the opposite end, where you have the respiratory depressant, this nervous system depressant. You're going to have heightened blood pressure and temperature and heartbeat, regular heartbeat. They can also have difficulty breathing, but their breathing is going to be more rapid and shallow as opposed to slow with the opioid overdose. They might have chest pain, seizures, stroke, and hallucinations. Okay. And so I'll check in again here before we move forward. Any other questions, comments? Okay, and so now we're going to talk about overdose prevention. So what we can do. Overdose prevention is important for all of our communities because of the current overdose crisis throughout the country. But it is especially important for survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence, because survivors who use substances can be, as we've discussed today, can be at an increased risk of accidental overdose for many reasons. And this goes back to substance use coercion. It might not even be that person's choice to use substances to begin with. They may be forced to use and therefore overdose as a result of that. While methamphetamine deaths are also on the rise, 50% of those deaths also involve opioids. So more often than not, people who are overdosing who are dying related to overdose have ingested opioids. And sometimes the person is using both opioids and stimulants by choice. A lot of times, and that's to balance out the effects. So you might have someone who's using heroin or fentanyl, because we know it's mostly fentanyl now. You might have someone who's using heroin or another opioid, and then they use cocaine or methamphetamine to kind of bring them back towards the other end of the spectrum, away from that nervous system depression. So, and you might have heard of the term speedballing. That's typically what they're talking about when they take that downer or that nervous system depressant, and then they take the stimulant to counteract some of those effects of that opioid on their system. However, many times overdose deaths result from meth or other stimulants that have been laced with fentanyl, unbeknownst to the user. And so in these situations, now naloxone can be helpful to someone who's used a stimulant and experienced an overdose, because it would act on the effects of the fentanyl. It would not do anything as far as alleviating those any overdose symptoms that they may be experiencing from the stimulants themselves, but it would counteract any effects of the fentanyl or opiate, any other opiate that they've ingested. Okay.
Jamie, this is Miranda. We have a question in the chat asking if there's a difference in the eye appearance based on it being a stimulant. I know you had mentioned it in the other slide.
Yeah. So just from my experience, from people who have used stimulants, the eyes tend to be, the pupils tend to be more dilated, and as well as the way the person acts, they're more anxious and or have difficulty sitting still or in one place, or forming a thought. They're just very, it's very, I always think of it as fast or speed. You know, they call a lot of stimulants speed, and there's a reason why. It's because you are sped up. Your body function, not just your bodily functions, but your systems, but the way that you think and process that way. But yes, from my experience, the eyes are not typically pinpoint like they are with opiates. They're more dilated. Now, someone could still have pinpoint pupils and use opiates, but that's usually, just from my experience, if they've had like a traumatic brain injury. So that's typically the only time I've seen that. Hope that helps. Okay, and we can go to the next page. Okay, so talking about evidence-supported opioid overdose prevention. Some of the most common forms is medication-assisted recovery. So that's like physicians or programs or clinics, settings that offer, I'm sorry. Sorry if you all hear any background noise. Okay, sorry about that. So this is like methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol. So that's what they mean by medication assisted recovery. Naloxone distribution, Narcan distribution, oftentimes provided by your local public health departments or other harm reduction organizations in your area, and as well as overdose prevention centers. They exist in many different countries now, all across Europe, Canada, Australia, and the US. And so just a little bit a little more about overdose prevention centers. They're also called harm reduction centers, overdose prevention sites, safe consumption sites, supervised consumption sites. And these are places where people can go to use drugs safely and have immediate access to life-saving measures if needed. These sites not only provide equipment and education for safer drug use practices, but they have advocates on site to help connect people with services, including treatment or housing, basic needs, and medical services. So in all, these opioid prevention, this type of opioid prevention reduces overdose deaths. It gives people access to supportive services, keeps people safe, does not increase crime in the surrounding areas where these sites and services are located. And it does decrease the spread of infectious disease. Okay. Next slide, please.
Jamie, this is Brandy. I just wanted to make a note of time, and this content is so amazing. So I just want to make sure that we think about the time that's left, and that we'll save the 5 minutes at the end for a little wrap up. And also maybe we can make sure we focus on the things to do or not do during overdose and overdose responses. So feel free to let me know, like however many slides, if we need to skip over any.
Yes, I sure will. So I'll talk briefly about this next slide. These are just the test strips that I've mentioned. These are specific for fentanyl, and a lot of harm reduction orgs give these out now so that a person can test the substance that they're using beforehand. And that way they can make an informed decision about whether or not they want to use that substance if it contains fentanyl. And so keeping in mind time, let's, if we can go to slide 24, responding to an opioid overdose. So we can just go through the steps of what to do if you suspect that someone is overdosing or has overdosed. So one of the, so just let's start by talking about naloxone, also called Narcan. It's available as an intramuscular injection, an auto injector, or nasal spray, but you're most likely going to see it in a nasal spray form. And so we will talk about how to administer that today. And you will find that you can access naloxone through local harm reduction organizations, pharmacies. You do not have to have a prescription for it. And the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment also has ways for you to access naloxone for your program. So when thinking about responding to a potential overdose, you want to think about SAVE me, the acronym SAVE me. So SAVE means stimulate. So you're going to stimulate an unresponsive person. So that could be the shaking of the shoulder, hey, are you okay? Or the sternal rub. Airway, A for airway. So you want to make sure, like you would with CPR, make sure that their airway is open and not blocked. V is for ventilate. And so that's the rescue breaths you're going to give. And that will be 1 breath every 5 seconds. You do not have to do chest compressions at this time. You're just going to focus on those breaths. And then E is for evaluate. You're going to stop and see, has this person responded to in any way to your steps so far? If not, then me comes in. And here, since this is specifically for the muscular injection, so that me is what that is for. But here we can say, this is where you administer Narcan or Naloxone of any kind, whether it's the injection or the spray. And so I actually have a video that a quick video that we're gonna watch on how to administer the spray, but it's very easy. You just open your kit, get out your Naloxone, and spray up the person's nostril. You cannot overdose. A person cannot overdose on Naloxone, so you can't give them too much. But I will say that we were seeing trends among patients that were using mostly or only fentanyl, to where it was taking more Naloxone for them to respond and come out of that overdose. So just be aware, you might have to administer Naloxone more than once, more than twice. I've talked to people who had 5 or 6 doses at one time. So just keep that in mind too. You might have to administer it more than once. This next slide just lists some of the places in Colorado where you can access that Naloxone for your self or your program. And the slide after that just goes over what should be in your kit, what we recommend that you put in your kit, and what's required and what's recommended. And there's also, oh, I did put it on here. I thought I had forgotten the rescue breathing mask. I know some people might not feel comfortable doing the rescue breathing, but there are masks that, and sometimes they come with your kit, that you can use for the rescue breathing, and it prevents. So say if they vomited in that process of providing aid, it would not, the mask prevents it from going back into your mouth. So if that is a concern of yours, there are masks that can help you with that. Okay, so this next slide just has the short clip on how to administer the Naloxone spray. And it looks like they've put the clip in the link. So it may be that you can go back and watch it. You will have access to these slides, but as I mentioned before, it's very easy to administer Naloxone spray. and just be prepared to use more than one dose.
Jamie, this is Brandy. I just wanted to note that I can stop sharing and go ahead and try to pull up that video. That link, does that link have multiple videos attached to it?
No, it should go directly to that one.
Okay, let me go ahead and I can do that. If you would like us to play that now, it's
Yeah, I
totally
think it'd be helpful for people to see.
This is Miranda. Brandy, the CDC website does have multiple, so I put that in the link. It has how to do the nasal spray and also the injectable. The YouTube link that I placed in there is specifically for the spray. So it's helpful, Brandy, for you to click on that one. That one will be the one that you want to play, and then just make sure you click on the bottom to share sound.
Yes, thank you, Miranda.
Thank you, Miranda. I am on it. Just 1 second. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Miranda, yes,
All
we
right,
can see your
let's
screen.
go ahead.
911, what's your emergency?
Thank you for showing that. So I know that it can seem a little overwhelming when you think about administering Narcan or Naloxone for someone, but don't be afraid. It's safe for you, it's safe for them, it's not going to hurt them. It's really their best chance at survival if they're overdosing. And it's easy. It can be a scary situation, but it's very easy to administer.
And
And so-
Jamie, this is Brandy. I'm sorry to interrupt. We put in the chat that we will be sharing our technical assistance document with everybody who's registered. And we did include some other videos. So just know that there's tons of videos out there. And thank you for sharing that one, Jamie. It's so helpful for folks to be able to see that. So thank you.
Yeah, great. No problem. That's awesome. Okay. Just real quick, what not to do during an overdose. Don't put someone in a bath, they can drown. Don't put ice on them, that can cause them to go into shock, cause them to become hypothermic, or it can cause more problems than it helps. Don't force them to force them to vomit or eat or drink anything that can lead to choking. Don't try to give them any other medications. Don't leave them alone. And don't run away. So best thing you do, call 911. If you have naloxone, administer that until help arrives. Just a reminder, naloxone does wear off. It only lasts 30 to 90 minutes in the body. So you always want to follow up with a call to emergency services, or take someone to seek emergency attention, because once that naloxone is out of their system, those symptoms of overdose can come back depending on how much is still in their system. So they could potentially be saved and then overdose and die an hour or two later. So it's very important to still call 911 and follow up. Good Samaritan laws do protect you in Colorado. You have the 911 Good Samaritan law. It protects you from criminal prosecution. If you try to aid someone who is actively experiencing a medical emergency, including overdosing. And there's also the third party Naloxone law that protects you as well. So let's skip to slide 34. And we're going to talk quickly about xylazine, and then we'll wrap things up. I think we've touched on everything else. So one other thing before we talk about xylazine is, if you do have to administer naloxone, we do recommend doing a trauma-informed care follow-up with the person that experienced the overdose. And if it was an overdose relating in death, to follow up with survivors of that of the person that has overdosed, if possible. Okay. Xylazine. Xylazine is a new threat to people using opioids, especially. It's also called Trink. It began on the East Coast in like the Philadelphia, Pittsburgh area. And it has steadily moved west. It is in Colorado as of last year. It is a non-opioid veterinary tranquilizer. And it, like opioids, affects the central nervous system, but it does not respond to naloxone like an opioid because it's a tranquilizer. It causes drowsiness, amnesia, respiratory depression, low blood pressure. But one of the scariest symptoms is skin ulcers and abscesses. These can not only open and become infected, but it can lead to amputation of limbs and digits, so like fingers and toes. Next slide, please. It is linked to increased overdose deaths primarily among opioid users. And so I put some stats in there for Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Maryland, just so you could see how it progressed over just a short 2 to 3 year time span. And just a reminder, it cannot be reversed with naloxone. So this is why it's extremely important to still call 911 if you've suspected someone's overdosing on opiates, because if it has Trink in it, or xylazine, or fentanyl, they're at an increased risk of overdose death. All right, and so this next slide, information is power, some of the things you can do to aid in overdose prevention. And this is just talking about non-coercive information sharing, how you can talk to your clients about their substance use and overdose prevention plans and things like that. Okay, and so I also put some next steps, some other things you can do in your community or your program to help fight the stigma of substance use as well as overdose. And as Brandy mentioned, I put information in there about the technical assistance document they're going to be sharing with you, as well as some other harm reduction resources and resources from our agency. that you might find helpful, and those links to those resources are also included in the slides. And so we have 4 minutes left. And I know that Brandy and Miranda want to talk to you all, but if anyone has any questions and we don't get to them before we all leave today, feel free to reach out to me at jwilson@ncdvtmh.org. And I'll put that in the chat. All right, and so thank you very much. And I'll hand it back over to you, Brandy.
Thanks so much, Jamie. We really appreciate this. So much wonderful content. It's so helpful. So while folks are thinking if they have any questions for Jamie, I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll. So if you wouldn't mind, actually, Miranda, are you able to launch the poll? It's not letting me launch it.
This is Miranda. Poll should be launched.
And so again, while you're thinking of questions and answering the poll, we really appreciate that. We want to let you all know that we are going to be sending out the materials, the follow-up materials for part 1 and part 2 to everybody all in kind of one email. So if you registered for both, you might end up with 2 emails. We apologize for that, but hopefully it should just be you'll get that information, you'll get the slides, you'll get the recording links in Spanish and also English and ASL. And we will send out the handouts that were used last week and also the technical assistance document that we just had translated into Spanish. So we have an English and a Spanish version for that as well. So just want to let you all know that those materials will come out at some point next week. And if you have questions or anything, feel free to contact myself or Miranda, and we'll make sure Jamie's contact information is in that as well. Does anybody have any questions? And Miranda, was the poll completed? Because I couldn't see it on my end.
Yeah, I think folks had stopped. I think I got all the responses that
Wonderful.
we could get. So I go ahead and did that. So feel free to open it up for questions.
Yes, and also we will be sharing out a feedback link that you all can give some narrative feedback if you have questions or things that you want to pass along to us about either part 1 or part 2, and we can share those with Jamie, or if you have feedback for us here at Violence Free Colorado, similar to our polls, that is an anonymous opportunity. So we won't have your contact information unless you share it with us and want a response. So we always like to let people know that you can always share narrative feedback as well, because I know we don't have that option in the poll. Jamie, any last things that you would like to say to wrap up?
No, other than thank you all for what you do. And it's a pleasure to have talked to you all today. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate all of you. And thanks so much, Jamie. This is amazing information. I know people are going to be able to keep using this for quite some time. So thank you all. Go ahead and stop our recording.